A widowed woman stands alone in the vast desert, her eyes fixed on two bound men whose identities are hidden beneath rough sacks and shorn faces. Haunted by loss and betrayal, she holds the weight of a painful secret between them. In this silent standoff, trust and vengeance hang in fragile balance. Who will reveal the truth first? When the woman unfastened the last knot, her hands trembled. The desert wind pushed dust across her boots as if the earth itself had a voice, whispering something too old and heavy for language. Before her, two men knelt beneath the fading sun. Bound hand and foot, their heads covered with rough burlap sacks, they hadn't spoken since morning. Their hair had been shorn to the scalp. Beards and mustaches razored off with the dull blade, she kept hidden in the folds of her skirt. She wasn't sure which one had cried softly the night before, but she'd heard it and she hadn't looked away. No one in town asked why she took them. No one dared. They had seen her ride out with rope, a pail of water, and no expression on her face. She was the widow of Marshal Boone Callahan, a man buried just outside the chapel fence because the town couldn't decide whether he died, hero or a disgrace. Her name was Ada. She never changed it. Even after they spat it in the streets, 3 years ago the winter came in early, and her husband did not. They said he ran. Said he stole gold from the stage he was sworn to protect and crossed into Mexico. Said he abandoned his badge in the town that once trusted him. She'd heard it from every direction, at the dry goods store, at the well, in the pews. Only her silence answered back. A woman has no sword but her silence. Silence can cut deep. But when a stranger rode into town 2 weeks ago, carrying a battered saddlebag and a scar across his neck like rope burn, Ada looked up. She hadn't looked up in years. Not like that. The stranger left something at her doorstep the next morning. A folded piece of leather with her husband's initials burned into it, and 2 names written inside. 2 men, she found them, and now they knelt before her in the desert, heads bowed by force or shame, she could not say. One tried to speak, but she pressed a finger to her lips. "Not yet," she whispered. "You'll speak when the dead are ready."
Ash settle.
The desert cooled, that kind of quiet, where even breath feels like trespass. She poured water into a tin cup and left it between them. Then she stepped back, barefoot in the dust, her boots held in her hands, as if ceremony demanded it. Her eyes scanned the horizon, not for rescue, but for remembrance. These men knew what happened, knew something the town never would, and as the stars began to form those old holy scars in the sky, Ada knelt too. Her knees cracked in the sand. Her breath was slow and heavy. "You rode with him," she finally said, her voice like the creak of a rocking chair left on a porch too long, "didn't you?" Neither answered, but one man's shoulders shook. Whether from shame or cold, she could not tell. The other lifted his head just enough to let the sack fall, revealing a face hollowed by wind and regret. She stared into it, unblinking. "Tell me where my husband died," she said. "Tell me who buried him." The man opened his mouth and found nothing. "I waited," she whispered. "I waited until the river froze and thawed again, till I could no longer smell him on his coat, till my boy forgot his voice." The wind carried the story forward, as if the desert itself remembered. That winter Boone left on patrol with 3 others. Only 2 returned. They said bandits took him, that his body was never found. But the gold, the letters, and the whispers told another tale. "I never wanted revenge," she said. "But my boy asked me once if his father had been a coward. Asked if I thought God would punish him." Still, the men didn't speak, but Ada saw it now. One of them couldn't hold her gaze. The other had nothing left behind his eyes, only the ache of something that had broken long ago and never been mourned. Then she did what no one expected. She reached forward and cut the ropes from their wrists. She stood, not as a judge, but as a mother, as a woman who had lost everything except the right to show mercy. "Walk," she said. "Walk into the night. You'll leave with the wind behind you. If the coyotes take you, so be it." They hesitated, but her eyes told them there was no vengeance left in her. As they disappeared toward the low hills, Ada sat by the water pail, her bare feet pressed into the sand, and when the last shape vanished from sight, she opened the saddlebag again. This time she took out the letter that was folded beneath the leather. A letter written in her husband's hand. It said only this: I didn't run. Ada, I followed them because they would have burned the town. If I die, forgive me. If I live, I'll never be the same man you loved. She touched the words as if they could still breathe. Then, from behind her, small footsteps approached. A boy no older than 9. Her son. Did you find them? He asked. She nodded. Did they tell you? No, she said. But I heard enough. The boy leaned against her side. She wrapped an arm around his shoulders, and the two of them sat in silence, watching the stars return to places they'd always belonged. The truth didn't come like a bullet. It came like a slow ache in the chest. It's a kind that lets you live but not forget. And Ada knew, somewhere beyond the hills. 2 men walked with ghosts at their heels. Not because she spared them, but because Boone had spared them first, and that was enough for now. The boy had not asked again. He hadn't spoken much at all, not since they returned from the desert. But he stayed close to his mother's side, shadowing her in silence, like he was afraid if he looked away. She might disappear to Ada kept, to the edge of town now. The chapel bell still rang every Sunday, but no one invited her anymore. The pews whispered when she passed. A few dared to nod, but not one offered their porch, not even for a glass of water. She didn't mind. The silence was her armor, and she had grown comfortable beneath its weight. Her home, a small weather-worn cabin 2 miles from the main road, sat tucked behind a line of mesquite trees. There the wind sounded softer. There she could still speak to Boone without drawing stares. That night, while her son slept by the hearth, Ada lit the oil lamp and unfolded the second page of the letter, the one she hadn't shown him yet. It wasn't addressed to her. It was written for someone named Josiah Bell. She knew the name. Everyone did. Josiah had been Boone's oldest friend once, before their tracks split somewhere in the mountains. The man had vanished soon after Boone's death, claiming a patch of riverland where the town's law couldn't reach. Folks said he'd gone mad with grief. Others said he'd been the one to sell Boone's trail to the bandits. No one knew for sure. But Ada had a feeling. She folded the letter again, tucked it beneath her coat, and saddled her horse before dawn. The sun rose behind her as she rode west, through dry creek beds and over jagged redstone. Her boy remained behind with Widow Crane, a quiet woman who had known Boone since childhood. He needs rest, Ada had told her, handing over a single worn satchel. And he needs someone who don't carry ghosts. By noon, the heat swelled, but Ada did not stop. She rode until the air tasted of iron and salt, and the bones of the land began to rise through the dust. That's where she found Josiah Bell. He lived in a cabin that wasn't really a cabin, just boards nailed into the face of a sandstone bluff. A mule chewed at the brush nearby. A coil of smoke drifted from the chimney like a last breath. Ada didn't knock. She stood in the doorway and waited. Inside, a man stirred. He looked older than his years, beard streaked with gray and hands cracked by sun and shame. Didn't flinch when he saw her. I knew you'd come, he said. Then you know why? Nodded. It wasn't supposed to be like that. You left him. Didn't have a choice. There's always a choice, she whispered. Silence stretched between them. Then he stepped aside and gestured to the chair near the fire. Ada remained standing. I read the letter, she said. He thought you might still have a soul. I didn't. Josiah's mouth twitched like he was trying to smile, but couldn't. Remember how he'd walked to a box near the hearth and opened it? From inside, he pulled a folded cloth and set it gently on the table. When he unwrapped it, her breath caught. Boone's badge. Still scratched and dull, but whole. I found him, Josiah said. 2 days after the ambush, he was alive barely. He asked me not to bring him back. Why? Because the men who rode with us would have hung him. He took the blame, said if they thought he'd run, at least the town would be safe. Ada gripped the edge of the door. Her knees begged to fall, but she held. You let them believe it, she said. I buried him myself. Cut his name into a rock with my own blade. Sat with him till the coyotes came. But I couldn't face you. Couldn't face your boy. She looked down at the badge. Her fingers touched the star that had once been pinned to her husband's chest. The weight of it felt like memory. Then why now? She asked. Why send the letter? Why not let the silence keep you buried too? Josiah's voice broke then, because I saw him in your boy's face. At the market last week. Couldn't die with that shame still on my chest. She looked at him, and for the first time, saw not the man who betrayed Boone, but the man who'd watched him die and carried that death every day since. I should hate you, she said. He nodded. Maybe you do. She reached across the table, picked up the badge, and turned to leave. Before she stepped out, he spoke once more. There's something else, he said. Your husband? He made me promise to protect you, if anything ever happened. If he didn't come back. Ada paused. And what did you do with that promise? I ran from it, Josiah whispered. But I've never stopped carrying it. She stared at him one last time, then walked out into the sun. That night, Ada returned home. The boy ran into her arms before she dismounted. She didn't speak of what she'd seen, didn't tell him about Josiah, or the badge, or the grave carved. Into rock instead. She gave him the badge and watched as he held it like something sacred. Your father didn't run, she said. He gave his life for a town that forgot him. The boy's eyes shone in the firelight. Will they remember now? No, Ada said gently, but we will. And that would be enough for now. Outside, the wind moved through the mesquite, like a voice just out of reach. Ada listened to it for a long while, then turned back to the fire and held her son close, and far beyond the hills. In a cabin nailed to stone, a man sat alone in the dark, whispering a name that the world had chosen, to forget but one that still burned in his chest, like a prayer. Boone. The desert wind had shifted. By dawn, the sand no longer felt like a place of silence. It pulsed with memory. It remembered the cries buried beneath the soil, the footsteps of the forgotten, and the voices that had once echoed through the canyons only to be silenced by betrayal. And in that very dust, a woman stood like an unanswered question, her shawl, frayed at the edges, fluttered against her shoulders like the torn wings of someone who had fallen once but had not stayed down. Her eyes were fixed on the two men, bound, and broken before her hands tied, faces masked with coarse sacks, their hair and manhood stripped away, not by cruelty, but by justice that had waited too long. They were not strangers. They were once her own. The younger one had once held her hand when she was weak. The older one had once promised her protection when she had nowhere else to go. But their kindness was a mask, and underneath it had been the rot of deception, of hunger for control. And now, everything was bare. She had dragged them into the desert not to punish them with death, but truth. They would face the very sun they used to hide from. They would taste silence the way she had once tasted shame behind her. A tiny child sat quietly on a folded blanket, chewing on a piece of dry bread, watching. The boy didn't understand the full shape of what was happening, but he could feel it. Children always could. They sensed when a storm was not about thunder, but about the moment before it. The woman stepped forward. She removed the sack from the older man's face. His eyes, once so proud, blinked under the blinding light. He tried to speak, but she raised her hand and he fell silent. I only ask you one thing, she said softly, her voice dry like the wind. Why? He didn't answer. Maybe he couldn't. Maybe the truth was too ugly for words. His lips quivered, his mouth opened, but then he shut it and lowered his gaze. Like a man facing the gallows, she turned to the younger one. She ripped the sack from his face too. His first breath was shallow. Fear coated his skin like sweat. Please, he began, but she shook her head. I didn't bring you here to beg, she said. I brought you here to remember. And then she sat down, not with rage, not with tears. She sat like a woman sitting before a fire, waiting for the last ember to speak. She reached into her satchel and pulled out an old photograph, creased, smudged, a picture from before the betrayal, a picture of all three of them. Smiling in a garden, the younger man looked away. The older one winced. You told me I was safe, she whispered to the wind. You told me I was like your sister. You told me I was yours. Said you'd never let anyone hurt me. But it was both of you who threw me into the fire. The silence that followed was the kind that filled graves. The child behind her reached out and touched a rock, tossing it gently into the sand. Even his small, unknowing gesture felt like judgment. And then she stood. "There's no court for what you did. No sheriff coming. No jury waiting," she said. "But there is this desert, and it remembers." The sun was rising higher now, baking the earth, cracking it open like secrets too long buried. She untied the ropes around their wrists, not out of forgiveness, but because justice, real justice, didn't need cages. It needed memory, and it needed them to walk the world knowing what they had done. "If I ever see you near me or my son again," she said, her eyes sharp as steel, "you will not leave walking." And with that, she turned and walked away. The child followed, quiet and light. And the two men, free now, but never truly free, remained in the heat of that desert, no longer as wolves, but as ghosts.